Welcome everybody to the Aaron Burr broadcast on the Free Thought Doctrine. I'm Aaron Burr, live on location in Colorado Springs. I'm here with our favorite guest, John, and our plan is to continue the conversation we started in the last episode, revolving around libertarian philosophy and maybe get into the Libertarian Party. So John, if you'd like to say hello.
Hey, yeah, Aaron, glad you're here in Colorado, and good to be hanging out and having this discussion face to face. You know, we don't get to do that very often. Generally, it's over a computer. So, looking forward to continuing the discussion we had last time. So, thanks for being here.
Awesome. So, I guess right off the bat, is there anything you want to bring up about from last time, or any new ideas? Or
as we talk about, we talked about the non-aggression principle, which I felt was a very interesting topic. But, the thing is, when we start talking about the non-aggression principle, it leans towards more, like you said at the beginning, the libertarian philosophies or ideas. And I think it's interesting because I think there's a lot of education that needs to be made about the libertarian philosophy. And when I say that, because I'll give you my take.
Please. My
take on the libertarian is it's one step away from anarchy. And reality is whether I'm right or wrong, that's kind of what I think a lot of people think, because a lot of people they think, well, libertarians, they don't like government, they don't want rules, they don't want laws, they don't want different things. Now, I know when we talked about the non-aggression principle, that doesn't really flow into that discussion, because the non-aggression principle is live your life the way you want to live it, as long as you're not interfering with somebody else's right to live, not being aggressive towards somebody else or their property, right?
Yes.
So I think that just having a discussion on really what libertarian philosophies are and how that flows into where we move different from what a Republican or a conservative even might think, vice a Democrat or liberal might think, and kind of just see where those kind of mesh and where they completely are opposite, because I think that's an important thing to understand.
I think you brought up a great point. And the thing I want to bring up about libertarianism is that libertarianism and libertarian philosophy are uniquely American. If you go back to the founding fathers of the founding of the nation, that what they preached back then was called classical liberalism, like the whole idea of separation of powers, individual rights. Now, that's the classical liberal tradition, which is libertarianism. So libertarianism is not a foreign idea to the American tradition. It goes in line, I would say, more so than, say, conservatism, republicanism, liberalism. Actual libertarianism is that classically liberal, don't mess with me, I won't mess with you kind of mindset, right? Like, don't hurt people, don't take their stuff, right? That is the most basic core element of libertarianism, which is a very American idea. When you talked about, it's very close to anarchism, it just depends on how you look at it. More or less, it's not so much that it's about, being anarchy in the sense that how we think of anarchy, like this chaos kind of situation, right? It's more scaling back centralization of power. So right now we have a centralization of power in DC, where DC has so much control over our daily lives, whether we realize it or not. Almost every activity you do, there's some sort of attachment to the federal government, right? Or to, you could say any government in general, but the federal government, right? There's, like, whatever it is, whether it's regulations on, your government-approved deodorant, right? There's, like, regulations on deodorant. There's regulations on, the tap water you drink, the bottled water you drink. There's just all over the place there's regulations, right? So when you say, libertarians are against all this, so you say libertarians are against the government, it's, at the end of the day, you said it perfectly. Don't mess, leave me alone, right? Just leave me alone, right? So if to you leave me alone equals anarchy, then yes, right? Like in the sense that you don't have people dictating your every move in life.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point there. You know, I don't want to say that when I say leave me alone, because we still need we still need laws. We still need to make sure that people just can't go out. You know, we don't want to be living in a Mad Max and the Thunderdome type situation in the world.
Okay, well, let me retort that for a second. So, when a principled libertarian says anarchy, right? I can't speak for everyone, but I could speak for at least a good portion of people that think along this way. I'm not talking about no laws, no rules, right? Because first of all, we already talked about the non-aggression principle and also private property rights, right? So if you have a people that are educated and respect the non-aggression principle and private property rights, a lot of those laws, like on the books, wouldn't necessarily be necessary because everybody would already be working along these guidelines. That's like number one. And number two, there would still be all your basic laws. It's just laws against victimless, non-violent, victimless crimes. That's the laws we're talking about getting rid of.
Right.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. No,
we're not talking about getting rid of laws for murder.
No,
you know what I mean?
and that makes sense. But I kind of want to go back also. You had mentioned, you know, and I'm not trying to pick at everything little thing you say, but I just found it interesting. It's when you said, you know, like against that, you know, like the government dictatorship. Yeah. Essentially, you know, government regulates everything that we do, right? Mm-hmm. Well, isn't there some good things in that though? I mean, if the government is regulating how much minerals and stuff like that can come through your tap water, if they're not regulating that, isn't that more dangerous for a person? Or is that saying that's too much control?
So right now, with government-backed monopolies in place, right, there's plenty, I know for a fact, there's plenty of water out there where there's minerals that people make arguments for certain minerals, fluorides, certain chemicals that are in their water that a lot of people are against already, that is just part of your normal tap water depending on where you live, right? So just because there's government regulations doesn't stop all these certain things from entering the water. If anything, it backs that up and then puts a smiley face on it, right? In a actual market-based situation where you actually had companies competing for to deliver the best service, whether it be water or whatever, right? It'll be in their self-interest and to be most beneficial to get that business for them to do everything correctly. Because then you'd be like, no, we're going to go hire this other company to run the water system or whatever.
So what you're saying to me there is instead of the government controlling it, it's privatized.
It's the market.
It's the market.
It's a consumer.
So a liberalism in that sense, or libertarianism in that sense means the market's going to drive what kind of water you get, not the government.
And when I say market, I mean the people.
Right.
The end consumer.
Okay.
Right? Because at the end of the day, in a true market situation, which is not what we have, but if we had a true market, laissez-faire system, then the consumer, the person, you know, they vote with their money, right? Right? Like they will determine, you know, which services they want to pay for. And if they're like, hey, why do I want to pay for this company over here that is putting the wrong things in my water or whatever, you know, I'm not going to do that. Or even better yet, say there's only one company that does that. Well, a group of people could get together and be like, hey, we're going to set up our own company to offer this better water or product or whatever. And then someone like me, like, hey, you mean that one company over there is selling water with this whatever crap in it? And these people over here, and they might be a startup, but maybe you get investors, be like, hey, invest over here, and this is going to be the cleaner, safer water. People are going to want to go in that direction, right? Like, in your own self-interest, you're going to be like, I'm going to pay for that. Because I can see the argument might be, well, they don't have the infrastructure to do that. But if you get enough people to drive a movement, you can get investors or whatever. I mean, it's just the market. The market will find the solution at the end of the day.
Okay.
If you have a true market that's not being manipulated by government actors.
Okay. All right. So in your mind, Aaron.
Yeah.
Give me, and I know this may not be a simple answer.
Yeah.
But give me a definition of, to you, what libertarianism actually is.
At the most basic elemental form, we've already discussed it, right? Libertarianism is the philosophy of leave me alone, and I will leave you alone. Right? Let people live their life the way they want to live, as long as they don't impede someone else to do the same. Right?
Okay.
Non-aggression principle. Don't hurt anybody. Don't take their shit. Right? And a good idea does not require force. Right? If it's a good idea, people will adopt it. You don't need to force it by the barrel of a gun. Right? Okay. That's at the most basic element. That's libertarianism.
Okay. All right. You and I had dinner earlier tonight, and I was asking you kind of where, in principle, again, I know you're not speaking for the Libertarian Party or anything like that. This is just your philosophies and what you've studied. And full disclosure, I haven't done a lot of research on the Libertarian Party or libertarianism or anything like that.
Okay.
So I kind of mentioned, and you and I were discussing it, and I think there's some interesting topics there. So everybody always wants to know the issues. Like when you go through an election, right? You have your Democrats, you have your Republicans, and they all want to know where do they stand on the issues? Where do they stand on the issues?
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some of those issues, okay?
Okay.
If we can. One of the first issues that's a huge issue right now.
Well, before we get into the issues, can I just explain one thing really quick before?
Sure.
So one thing I want to explain is that there's libertarianism and there's a libertarian party, and they're two different things. And then when you get to the libertarian party, there's several different factions who have similar but different takes on some of these issues, right?
Okay.
And even right now as we speak, there's sort of a civil war between within the Libertarian Party versus like the mainstream people who've run it for a decade or two versus a fresh new caucus of the last couple of years called the Mises Caucus, and they're more along the tradition of what I'm talking about. But even then, I don't speak for the party or for the Mises Caucus. But yeah, so let me just put that on the table.
Right, okay, and I appreciate you saying that, and that's interesting because before we do get into those issues, let's dig into that a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
You said there's different factions within the Libertarian Party.
Yes.
Okay, and libertarianism, but in your estimation, in your mind,
uh-huh.
is the general principle of libertarianism what we talked about?
Yeah.
Leave me alone, I'll leave you alone.
Yep.
And everybody will be happy.
Yeah.
But is that the general consensus amongst pretty much all, even within the different factions within the Libertarian Party?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I mean, it's one reason why the Libertarian Party hasn't been successful is because they don't always agree 100% on everything, and they're always kind of there's a lot of friction involved, right? I would say that yes, but mainstream maybe not as much.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
But that's changing. Like I said, as I speak, the Mises Caucus has taken over state conventions state by state in this last year. So, and the mainstream guys are trying to fight against that. And the Mises guys are 100%, leave me alone kind of deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So let's take this then, because it sounds like you've done a lot of research on the Mises side of the house, and that's where you kind of fall into your philosophy is where you fall into that line, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's take it. From that lens then.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take a look at some of these issues that we kind of brought up.
Okay.
That I want to bring up. First one is we mentioned. This one's very big hot topic is
of course.
The border.
Yeah.
Okay. When we were just talking at dinner, I thought it was very interesting because one of the first things you said was open border, and my initial response is ooh,
yeah.
I'm not for open borders.
Of course. Yeah.
So explain to me though.
So when I said open border, the mainstream Libertarian Party is open borders.
Okay.
The Mises Caucus is split on, there's different variations, and those go between privatized borders and open borders, but only if you eliminate the welfare state and do not allow those people to vote. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you say privatized border, what do you mean by that?
Because what I mean is this would be, if you were to fast forward society to what the anarcho-capitalists would envision society to be, which would be a completely privatized society. There wouldn't be a government at least as we know it, right?
Okay.
So all that land will be owned by somebody, by different people, and it'll be up to the individual landowner to whether they want to open their border or not.
Oh, okay.
That's what I mean by that, privatized borders. That's what they mean by privatized borders. But the bigger strain, I guess, is open borders if we would eliminate the welfare state in general, right? And then not allow those people coming through to vote, because then, of course, they'd vote to have a welfare state. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Well, I would assume that the hope or the pursuit in allowing, immigrants into the country through the border are to continue to try to go on the path to become legal citizens and get those rights.
Well, the whole point would be that it's free trade, right? So you have trade and people flowing through borders. The end goal of helping the entire public, right? To raise a standard of living for everybody, and to drive, costs down, right? And to deliver more innovation and better products and services. And it's the whole idea of what free trade is supposed to be, right? Like you say, for free trade, if free trade actually happened the way it's supposed to happen, then there really wouldn't be any wars, because everybody would be tied together in commerce, essentially, right? So it's kind of going along those ideas.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's interesting, and I'll be honest, I have to say that based on, from the people that I've talked to about your podcast and who listen to you, I think that a lot of people would have to agree that eliminating a welfare state would be a key, because I think that's probably one of the main frustrations, is that a lot of people feel like they're working hard to get to a certain level, and yet somebody who just comes across the border is just handed things to live, and that kind of takes away from.
Well, libertarians are against all welfare, right? So that includes with people coming across the border, new immigrants. And one thing to keep in mind is what libertarians are against is the fact that we're against all sorts of any and all subsidies from the state, right? So that includes subsidizing the security on the border, subsidizing the kids in cages and that whole apparatus, subsidizing building a wall, subsidizing all this government money to go on both sides. Like, we spend money to take care of the people when they get here. We spend money to stop them from getting here. We spend money when they do get here. You know what I mean? There's all this money is being poured into the border, and we're against all this government spending. So.
Right. Okay. No, and so now let's expand on that when you say all welfare.
Yep.
And let's take it away from not just the border.
Yeah.
And let's talk a little bit more about that. There's a lot of programs out there that help people. That, while I'm against welfare personally, that's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
Because I think people should have to work for what they get. They shouldn't just be handed something.
It's a very libertarian idea right there.
But I also do believe that there are people that need help. And, I'll be honest, when I was first getting onto the scene at 18, 19 years old, I always teach my children personal responsibility. But I had a child at a very young age, 20 years old, and I was the only person working, and this was pre $15 an hour.
Yeah.
And we were on what we call WIC, which, assisted with food, like diapers and formula and things like that. So are the libertarianism, are they against that kind of stuff too, or is it?
I'll tell you why. Yes, because as libertarians, we believe that the government intervention and subsidization is bad, right? Like, whenever the government intervenes, it's always at the benefit of someone else, or it's causing injury to someone else to help someone else.
Okay.
Right? You're causing pain to someone else to help someone else, and then we're just against that. Period. Like, I'm not government intervention and welfare requires breaking the NAP, right? You're using aggression or the threat of aggression or force, taking something from somebody else to help someone else.
Okay.
So in the end, it's immoral, right? Okay. And two, I'm not against helping people that are hard on times. But if we had a system where there was no government intervention, we could rely on private charities. Because the thing is, the American people are extremely generous people, right?
I agree.
And they do help their neighbor. But the thing is, we put this false... they put this situation in, or this apparatus in, where they get to deny your basic self. Your how do I say it? It's like they put an apparatus in to let a lot of people get away with feeling that they could. What's the word I'm trying to think of? It's like they get their personal responsibility of taking care of your neighbor. They get to put in the state. And, they'll take care of them. Like I don't have to worry about this because I'm paying taxes and they're
projecting my responsibilities of helping somebody onto the government.
Exactly. Right. And so if we had a system where there was no government intervention or safety net, and this has happened before. I'm not just making stuff up. But if you look back in history before the government became what it was, like prior New Deal and all that stuff, private charities, private businesses, they used to donate and do all kinds of stuff to help people.
Kind of like the Salvation Army.
Yeah.
Salvation Army. Now, they were probably subsidized a lot with government funding.
I'm not sure.
I don't know for sure either. I can't say that 100%, but sometimes you would have to assume.
Yeah.
But they do a lot of good things for people. And so things like that is what
things like that. If the government wasn't there, those situations and churches and all those people would step up because that's what people do, right? Like libertarianism is derived around the idea that people generally speaking are good people, right? The people generally speaking want. I'm not trying to go, and the mass majority of people are not trying to murder and kill everybody,
no,
right? Most people thrive on cooperation.
Okay.
Right, like a volunteer. They call it voluntarism. Right, it's a voluntary society where there's nothing being forced by the barrel of a gun. Right. Again, don't get confused with me not saying there's not any type of security. Right. I'm not saying it's a hippie commune and everybody's peace, love, and all that. But I'm just saying, generally speaking, people thrive off cooperation.
Okay.
Right. And that would be part of that.
So a lot of people say that the Libertarian Party is anti-government. Is that an accurate statement?
The Libertarian Party itself?
Or libertarianism is anti-government, I should say.
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense of how government as we know it, sure. Right? And government as we know it as this big, huge leviathan of power and control, centralization of power, then yes, we're against, libertarians are against that. Again, though, because you're going to be, because again, that brings in the top of anarchy, right? Anarchy, what people have been bred to, or anarchy, what people have been indoctrinated to believe in, is total chaos. But my argument is, what we have now is chaos, right? When you have, when you have people going to prison for victimless, nonviolent crimes, that is chaos. When you have no-knock warrants for nonviolent offenses, that is chaos. When you're bombing countries on the other side of the world that have nothing to do with our actual security, that is chaos. When you have people going to prison for all kinds of things that have nothing to do with hurting other people or taking other people's stuff, to me that is chaos. I could just go down the line, all these things. To me, those are chaos. That is chaos, right? If you have a system where you actually respect NAP, private property rights, and self-ownership and stuff like that. And I'm not saying you couldn't have security in a government of some sort. Like you could have. Well, what I would preach is, and what a lot of libertarians preach is localism, right? That the government close to the people knows best, right? And a lot of libertarians, a lot of ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalists, we do want no government at all. But at the same time, it doesn't mean you couldn't have community co-ops, and it doesn't mean that you couldn't, vote or, set up your own security apparatus or whatever, right? Like, we're not saying we're against. It's not like a Mad Max situation. It's still a civil society with law and order. It's just not said. The only difference is what we have now. We have a monopoly of power and a monopoly. There's only one monopoly that can initiate force, right? And there's no real accountability, right? If the neighborhood feels that, say, the police are either being too brutal or whatever, and they all these accusations of brutality or whatever, or in situations that I've not talked to a lot of people where the police aren't there at all, right? Or like we saw in 2020 with the riots and stuff, where the vandalism, where the cops kind of just stood by and let it happen, right? Like in these certain situations, what is a citizen left to do? Nothing, right? There's no accountability, right? So in a situation that I'm talking about, the power would be in the people, where, hey, this police force, XYZ, like I just said, you're fired. We're not paying for this anymore. Because in this system there wouldn't be taxation. We'd be like paying your phone bill. You're paying your police bill or whatever. Hey, guess what? You guys let my business, all those businesses that got rioted on, burnt down, you didn't do a damn thing to stop that, right? I'm not paying you anymore. We're going to hire someone else. Or this community's going to vote on a new sheriff, and we'll pay them directly, or whatever the situation is. That way they're held accountable, right? Like, you're fired, essentially, right? You let my business burn down, you guys are just standing there doing nothing? Yeah, screw that. Like, you're fired. We're going to use that for any public service we have now. It's the same kind of mindset.
I think some people would argue that is, in principle, a system we have in place now.
And I would say, no, we don't.
Well, and the reason I say that is, hear me out, we vote for our lawmakers. We vote for our governor. We vote for our senators. We vote for our House of Representatives. We vote for our city council. We vote for our mayor. If we're not happy with them, we vote for somebody new. Now, the challenge is I think one of the first steps in, and I know we're talking about libertarianism, but, I think one of the first steps to getting rid of that is term limits, but that's a whole nother conversation to have.
Sure. But see, here's the thing. I mean, we vote, so like a representative, they cover, I forget, is it 300,000, 400,000 people or something like that, right? So they're held 300,000, 400,000 people. And they go to D.C., and they're only supposed to be representing you on national issues, right? And in reality, so this could easily be taken the wrong way, because what I'm saying is one person for 300,000 people that's way too small, right? Like, you shouldn't have one person represent 300,000 or 400,000 people. But I'm not necessarily saying, okay, so should have more representatives. What I'm saying is keep it local, right? Okay. Like, I'm all for, you said, city councils and mayors and all that stuff, right? At least with the system we have now, I'm all for supporting that, because at least you're supporting local, people or whatever, people in your community, right? And the problem is, like you're saying, we vote on this, but a lot of that is completely corrupted, right? Yeah. It's paid for, big government, big business, it's hand in hand, and they don't truly represent the people, right? And at the end of the day, you're left with these options of two different evils to vote on, right? It's the two lesser evils,
sure,
right? Depending on what you believe in. Like, if you believe in what I believe in, I believe in freedom, I believe in liberty, I believe in peace, I believe in consent. Are those people fighting for that when they go to D.C.? They're not. They're bought and paid for by the big money interests, the special interests. They own those people, lock, stock, and barrel, because that's how they win elections. That's how it's all about money, power, and control, right? So I would say, maybe in principle we have it, but we 100% don't have it in reality.
No, and that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so that's very interesting. I think it's a very interesting concept. It's very interesting. I don't want to say concept, because I know libertarianism is a true philosophy. Yeah. And I think that as we move forward, I guess it's kind of frustrating as just somebody who kind of looks at everything on how we determine what's happening in this world, because that just seems so simple.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, a lot of our problems in our society, in our American society at least, is centralization of power and nationalism. Like, those two things create so much trouble in our daily lives in terms of how we interact with the government, right, in society. Because we should be focusing on what's happening in our own communities and not worried about, like, if we live in Colorado, we should be worried about what's going on in Colorado, not what's going on in Florida, or not what's going on in California, not what's going on in New York, and vice versa. People in New York should not be worrying about what's going on in Colorado, and people in Florida should not be worrying about what's going on in Colorado, and people in California should not be worried about what's going on in Colorado. But we have this I know why, because we've been indoctrinated since we were 5 years old going to government-run schools, that this whole idea of, one nation and, just like all these things of nationalism, they're just like, pounded into us. And we, on purpose, so that we forget that the power is with the people, right? It's not with this huge, giant machine, right, that's like controlling everybody, right? It's with the people that we have the power, and therefore we should agree on and what goes on in our own communities, not worry about what's going on the other side of the country.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
All right. So when we talk about libertarianism, and again, just love these conversations, and we're getting to some of the issues. The border one's very interesting. I think the elimination of welfare is very interesting. I remember a while back you and I talked about it was a book that was written in the 50s or 60s, and you see it now. I apologize. I wish I knew the name of it, and I'll look it up here in a little bit. But the principle of the book talked about we're seeing it now as some of these states start eliminating unemployment.
Okay.
They're reducing unemployment or eliminating unemployment if you have the ability to work. And now there's protests going on in some of these states because of that.
Okay.
And this book that was written, and again, I'll look it up here, is it discussed the fact that the more you give people, the harder it is going to be to take it away. And this was written a while back, and it kind of talks about the welfare.
Well, it's the more you give the government, they're not going to give it away, right?
Well, but the problem is the more the government gives to people. Because here's the thing, Aaron. If the push would be to, hey, we want to go towards that libertarianism philosophy, which I agree. If we continue, though, if a libertarianism philosophy is no welfare, we're not going to give things to people. Yes, there might be privatized charities and things like that to help people, but you need to be personally responsible for what you do.
Yeah.
And the problem is we've gotten so far away from that philosophy because look how many people are on unemployment right now. I mean, we were just talking about it in the sense that, I've seen reports and just watching, different shows and looking at the news, restaurants are 60 to 70% undermanned because nobody wants to go back to work. I mean, I've never seen so many help wanted signs in this city in Colorado Springs because nobody wants to go back to work because the government is giving them money. Well, the problem is if you bring somebody else in saying, hey, we're going to take that away from you. This is why, and it may make sense, and it's a good thing, but people are going to push back on that because they're being given everything that they want, and they don't have to work for it. So how do you foresee getting to that point where we start moving back towards a libertarian philosophy to get away from a welfare state?
Well, I mean, there's several different answers there. And part of it's not their fault because, as I've said before, we are indoctrinated from a very young age that, the government is God. That government can give you everything you need to survive. That if anything bad happens, you could rely on the government to take care of you, right? And that's what's happening. And the government wants that. They want you to be reliant on them, right? So partly it's not people's fault per se because they've been trained since they were very young to believe that the proper role of government is to provide these things when it's not, right? They've been manipulated, right?
Okay.
So it's very reminiscent of what the government does, where they create a problem and then turn around and say, hey, there's a problem and you need us to fix it. So it's that type of situation, right? But one of the things is that, the reality of the situation is reality hurts, right? Like, the truth hurts. Like, these may be things that people don't want to hear, and they may protest it. But the reality is that, well, first of all, the government, we can't afford to keep doing this because we're going to go bankrupt, right? We're on a path of national suicide, trying to provide all these things to all these people all the time, and it just literally is not feasible to continue. You know what I mean? So, because we'll go bankrupt, we'll literally go bankrupt, right? Like, we cannot afford to keep subsidizing people. Now we're talking about subsidization. Yeah. And it's only benefiting them at the injury of another, right? So all these people who might be getting money to not work, and look who is hurting. It's hurting all these business owners, right? And it's hurting all the other people that are taking the money away from them to give them this money, or it's supporting the Federal Reserve that keep printing off money to give them, which only drives inflation up, right? To hurt everybody. You see how it's just this endless cycle? Right. And we got to break the cycle. And the reality is, it may hurt these people, at least in the short term, right? And that's where I would say, where educating the public, that plays a certain role, especially for people like me and people like you, right? We need to spread these ideas of liberty, of freedom, and self-determination, right? And personal responsibility, like you said. Like, these are a lot of hard pills to swallow. The reality is, when it comes to libertarianism, although it is very American and very embedded in that classical liberalism that we've had since the founding, we've come to a point where there's still a lot of pills that are very hard to swallow for a lot of people, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that this is I'm not preaching utopia, right? I'm not saying that if we get rid of unemployment or we get rid of any government program, then everything's going to be perfect, right? There's still going to be hard things to deal with. You still have life to deal with. But I'm all about eliminating, a harmful apparatus that only gets what it wants done through force and the threat of force, which is the government, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean that's interesting, and that's a good answer. I think when you start talking about that, you're right. I mean, change is never easy.
Yeah.
And we've gotten to a point through a welfare state that has been very difficult, and I think it's made it harder. And you mentioned inflation, and all that does is just drives up cost. And a lot of people are going to sit there and say, well, that's just the price of doing business. That's the price of what we pay to maintain.
What's the price? What do you mean?
Inflation or the cost. That's just the price of.
Well, those people don't understand what inflation is.
Well, and that may be the case, and you're absolutely right about that. I just hear a lot of well, that's just how it is. The supply and demand.
But so inflation manipulates supply and demand. Right. It has nothing to do with actual supply and demand. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right about that. All right. So not to stray off too far off topic there. Let's go back and talk a little bit more about libertarianism when we start discussing comparing it to a conservative Republican and their thoughts.
Okay, I mean, that's the easy one, right? And again, I know a lot of conservatives, right? And I agree with them on many issues, actually, right? But there's just some things that are very hard pills for them to swallow, which a lot of them probably never will swallow, right? Because what I'm saying is, I've talked to a lot of conservatives, and I'll be like, hey, libertarians are all about, like we said, leave me alone, just let me live my life. And they'll be like, yes, me too. I'm all about that too. I totally agree with you. Leave me alone, let me live my life, blah, 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 blah. And then you go, oh, and then see that guy kneeling during the national anthem? That's fine with me, because, hey, that's his life, this is mine. And they will not have it, right? How dare that person kneel during the national anthem? Or whatever XYZ you want to put in there. You know, maybe someone doesn't want to do the Pledge of Allegiance. How dare they? What are they, a communist? How that's American. So in reality, they're not. They're only leaving me alone as long as you agree with me. But if you don't agree with me, then we're not leaving anybody alone. And liberals do the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the big difference is when we principled libertarians say, hey, let me live my life, live and let live, right? I freaking mean it, right? What somebody else believes or does over there, I could care less. As long as they're living, as long as they're not hurting anybody and they're not stealing anybody's stuff, right? I don't care. If they don't believe in the flag, if they don't believe in the national anthem, if they hate the Pledge of Allegiance, it's fine with me, whatever. I could care less what they think or do, as long as they're not hurting anybody else. So that's one difference that I've seen between actual libertarians and liberals and conservatives. Is they'll say, oh, yeah, I'm all about, living my life the way I want, let everybody do their own thing. But the moment someone does something that to them is sacred, they cannot have it, right? They will not process that. It's not okay. So that's one big difference right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So with that on that same specter there, and we brought this up before. Actually, talked about it a little bit at dinner. I want to rehash it. Is there was a big issue when people were kneeling during the national anthem,
sure,
or even in Silverton, Colorado, here in our the state I live in here. They talked about eliminating the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah.
And, libertarianism says, hey, as long as you're not hurting me, you do what you want.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a philosophy behind that, though, that's drive pride. Pride in your country. Pride in what you believe in.
Sure.
And, libertarians, they don't believe in the country. They don't love this country. They just want to live their own life. They don't care about that one nation under God type philosophy. All right. What do you say to that?
Well, there's two things. One, if a libertarian really does feel that way, or anybody feels that way, then fine. Okay. They can feel that way all they want. And two, we're conflating two different things here, right? There's the country and there's the state, right? The country is shared culture, shared values, shared principles. That's one people, right? You can have all the pride you want in that, right? That's history, that's customs, traditions, courtesies, all that stuff. And then there's the state, and that's the political apparatus. That's the rulers and all their tools that they use to maintain and concentrate power and to rule over you. And those are two different things. You can have pride in your country and you can love your country, but it doesn't mean that you have to agree with everything the state does. Because the state will make it, like I was talking about earlier, government is God. The state will make it sound like if you speak out against anything that the state deems is holy, whether that be the flag or the national anthem, even if you do cherish that stuff, my point is the state will use that if you speak out against that, you're a heretic, right? And then you deserve to be destroyed. Because how dare you speak out against your country, but you're not speaking out against your country. You're speaking out against the political apparatus that rules over the country, and not the country itself and the people.
Now, a lot of your listeners are very educated in these things, and at least understanding when you say country versus state.
Yeah.
So let's make sure we define that a little bit more.
Okay.
And I want to focus on the state aspect of it.
Yes.
When you say state, you don't mean the state of Colorado, the state of California. You mean the government as a whole, because you have your country. You said country and state.
Yeah.
So when you say state, you're not talking about a state within the country. You're talking about the government rule over the country. Yes. Essentially, right?
Yes, I mean, it can mean the state of Colorado in terms of the government of Colorado, if you want to put it that way. It can mean that, depending on how you're defining the state in that moment. But when I'm talking about the state, when we're talking about the whole country, there's the country and then there's the government.
Right.
There's the political apparatus that rules over the country.
Okay. Right. All right. I just wanted to make sure I was clear on that, just because I didn't want to confuse it.
Yeah.
A little bit more. So that's interesting, though, that you say that, because I think that is one of the big things, and I think back in 2016, that was a huge driver when Trump got elected. Was was we kind of called it national pride. People were, when he got elected and he was president, you saw a lot more American flags. You saw a lot more people that were out there. Now granted, there's, you had your people that were trying to burn the American flag at the same time.
Yeah.
But what do you say to that, actually, now that I said that term, burn the American flag? I want to go off stream real quick here.
Sure.
As a libertarian, I'm not aggressing against you.
Yeah.
But I burn the American flag.
Okay, so you have a right to burn the American flag.
Okay.
See, this is the problem, right? And I know a lot of conservatives will get angry at me when I say this.
Sure.
Right? Because the problem is we've been indoctrinated so much by the state, and I've also mentioned the cathedral, right? The cathedral is part of the state. The cathedral is the media, academia, and the state all in one, right? And the cathedral / the state has indoctrinated us from such a young age that depending on, it doesn't matter whether you consider yourself a liberal or conservative, you're worshiping something about the cathedral and the state, right? Like liberals in general, they worship the government, whether they admit it or not. They believe in the government, the power of the government, they love the government. Conservatives do too. They just they hide it under certain things, right? They might not be like, I love the government, like liberals would, but they're gonna be like, they're gonna worship symbols of the state that they don't even realize represent the state. They worship the flag. It's like this holy, sacred thing. It's the flag. I understand that. I get respect in the flag. I respect the flag because it does. The people that died for this country, they flew that flag, right? So I respect that, but I don't worship the flag. At the end of the day, it is cloth, right? I don't worship the military. I don't worship the police. I don't worship the Constitution. I don't worship the national anthem. I don't worship the Pledge of Allegiance. I respect all those things, sure, but I don't worship them to the point that if someone disagrees with it, that they're a heretic, they're communists, I have to destroy them. They have to die, right? They have to put them in prison. We gotta lock them in a cage. How dare they? It's okay. If we have a different opinion, if they want to burn the flag, then they could go burn the flag. Do it in a safe manner, where you're not breaking the NAP for anybody else, you know what I mean? But and a lot of conservatives are going to disagree. Like, how dare you speak out against the military? How dare you speak out against the police? How dare you speak out against the flag? And it's not that I'm speaking out against them. I'm just saying I don't worship them. Right. I don't hold them this sacred reverence, right? I respect them for what they are, and I move on, right? Right? Like, there's no worship here. I'm not bowing down to any of these things, right? Okay. And I'm not saying these people literally do those things, but they have like this mental thing in their head. They've been indoctrinated since a very young age to like those are so holy and so reverent. Like,
you're absolutely right.
Dare anybody like speak out against those things?
You're absolutely right about that. I mean, I was in the military.
Yeah.
And we respected the flag. I wouldn't say we worshipped it, but you damn well better know how to fold it. You damn well better not let it touch the ground. You salute it when you.
Yeah, well, here's the thing is, I get that, I respect that, but if someone disagreed with me and said, no, that's all BS, that's all bullshit, then they can have that opinion. Sure. If they're like, well, fuck that, I'm not going to fold this shit, I don't give a fuck if it touches the ground. But, then that's their opinion, and they don't care, and that does not upset me if someone has that opinion. Sure. Some people are like, oh, they hate America and blah, 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 and they're communists and blah, blah. Right. At least we have a different opinion. Like, if someone rejects it, that's fine, right? Like, yeah, sure.
And I think you found a fine line. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even call it a fine line. You've found that line between what I think people consider a conservative, and that's a big piece of it. And it's not all of it.
Yeah.
But I think between a libertarian and a conservative would be.
Yeah.
Is that.
No, it is. It is, yeah. I mean, it's just like I said, I don't, to me, it's the state, and they use those as tools to force obedience and compliance to them, to the state. They use the flag. They use the idea of the police. They use the idea of the military. They use the national anthem. They use the Pledge of Allegiance. I mean, look at the Pledge of Allegiance. You're pledging to a cloth at the end of the day, right? Yep. From a very young age, you're pledging these people to the state, to this cloth that represents the state, right? One nation under God. You know what I mean? Like, And a lot of conservatives love they adore, they cherish the Pledge of Allegiance. And again, if they want to, go for it. But what I'm saying is, if someone doesn't want to, then so be it.
Sure.
Right?
Okay. So you're not saying that libertarians don't wouldn't necessarily like, no, I'm not gonna say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Some might.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah, some might.
Whether you're a libertarian, conservative, liberal, whatever, if you want to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
If you want to say it, say it. If you don't want to say it, don't say it. But if I don't want to say it, you're not going to force me with the barrel of a gun to say it. And I also think it's morally wrong to ostracize or treat someone differently because they didn't want to, and vice versa.
Gotcha. No, and that makes a lot of sense. And that's again, I love the fact we're having this conversation because I think it opens up a lot of eyes for people to understand what the actual ideology for true libertarianism actually is.
Yeah.
Because, again, if somebody was to look at me and say, John, what is a libertarian to you? I'd hand them the Mad Max movie and say, go watch that.
Yeah, and that's would be completely false. You know what I mean? Like,
you're absolutely right.
If anything, there's different strands. Like, you could say that represents, and even then I wouldn't say it's libertarian, but there's what we call ancoms, anarcho-communist, right? And in reality, anarcho-communist could work if you had maybe 5 people. I'd say 10, probably 5 people. Like a literal little commune of 5 people. Everybody shared everything, and there was no force involved, right? But after that, it starts to require force. Right. And in a Mad Max situation, it's still tyranny. There's still the people who use force to win, to kill, and to, you know what I mean? Like that is, there's still like a governmental structure there. Right. It's just the might. They call it might is right, right? Might is right, like the strong, right? But in that, what you're talking about, there's no NAP, there's no non-aggression principle, there's no self-ownership, there's no private property rights. That's the big one, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why, in reality, that would be the Mad Max situations that is literally the opposite of libertarianism.
So a few shows back, you and I talked a little bit. We didn't touch on it too heavily, but we got into the discussion a little bit about decentralization.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like to me that a big part of what would make libertarianism actually function is decentralization.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
And when you say, no government or local government, okay, but you said no taxes.
Yep.
That's interesting.
Taxation is theft.
Trust me, I hate giving away 35% of my paycheck every month.
That's theft, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with you at all. But, so, if that's the case,
yes,
then how do we, and in Colorado, people, if anybody's listening to this in Colorado, they're just going to laugh. But how do we go about maintaining our infrastructure without, is that all privatized as well?
It's all privatized, and you would pay services, right, for what you use and want directly, right?
Okay.
So if you use, like, parks will be privatized, right? There would be, like, someone would have ownership of parks, and that would be in their self-interest to take care of that park if people want it, because if people would have to come on there, they have the choice to charge them, and I'm not going to go pay to go see a park that's trashed. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I don't mind paying that because I'm not being taxed anyways. It's not like I'm being taxed and I got to go pay to go to Garden of the Gods or something like that, right? Like, Garden of the Gods is owned by whoever owns it, and they have a self-interest to take care of it so that people will come and pay them to go see this beautiful park, right? And I'm not getting taxed anyway, so it's not like, so I have that extra money there to pay to go see a park if that's what I choose to do.
So what about roads? Do I have to pay to use specific roads? Do I have to pay? I mean, I'm just, like I said, I'm not saying that you've thought this whole thing through.
Yeah, I'm thought the whole thing through.
I'm just bringing up a couple of...
So, and don't take this as an attack on you, but one thing that a lot of people bring up is, who's going to pay for the roads? And usually, and I'm not saying, again, I'm not attacking you. I'm just saying a lot of people... But I'm not. I'm just saying that a lot of people do use that as an attack, right? They go, oh, who's going to pay for the roads? As if you're so stupid to believe in what you're saying. Who would pay for it? It's like the only thing they could resort to, like to attack me or whatever, us, is who's going to pay for the roads? And I guess my problem with traditional conservatives and liberals is they have no imagination whatsoever. They're so locked in their viewpoint that they cannot even imagine any other way of getting things done. Because the fact of the matter is, yes, companies and neighborhoods and people like that would supply the roads that when you buy your house, when you pay rent, you could include that in your contract, because everything would be in a libertarian society. A lot of it is based on contract law, because you don't have that huge legal infrastructure, right? You just have, it will be a lot of contract law based off that non-aggression principle, self-ownership, private property. Without those principles being in mind, you'd have contracts. Hey, I'm buying this house. That means I have access to all these roads. Or when the companies, it will be in a company's interest, a business interest, to build the roads that get to their company or their business, right? For them to fund those roads and to make them nice. And now you have actual accountability. Because my question is, when you're driving down these roads now and you see potholes, and do you feel, are you good with that? Does that make you feel good? Do you feel comfortable that your tax dollars are...
Oh, I absolutely know that.
Well, there's my question to people, right? Like, well, now, go to somewhere like Chick-fil-A, where they kind of bend over backwards for you in terms of surface, right? If companies like Chick-fil-A now ran their roads, or the roads to get to their business, it would be in their self-interest to make sure that road is good to go, right? Especially if you're paying them directly, because otherwise you're like, I'm not going to go to that business over there. I'm not going to use a road. No, forget that. They're going to lose business. You know what I mean? Like, sure. It'll be in their self-interest to supply roads and have good roads and have there be accountability, right? Mm-hmm. To let the whole system flow. You know what I mean? Like, right now we have the system where it's like, oh, whatever. There's a road full of potholes. I'm going to go bring this complaint to this huge Leviathan government, and they're going to take care of it? No. You know what I'm saying? Okay. But now I could go to the company and be like, hey, I'm not going to use your service anymore because I can't even use the damn roads. And now imagine times that by, say, 1,000, 10,000 people said that. And now we're like, we want to fix these roads so we don't lose business.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Okay. No, and that makes complete sense. So let's keep going down that path. Though.
Yeah.
And let's talk about privatizing and looking at, and again, I'm not saying that you've got this all planned out.
Yeah, because I don't. I definitely don't.
I know. But I like to kind of, look at things in different ways. And to me, and I don't want you to you don't have anything you can throw at me. Right? To me, if you're going to truly privatize and take away government, take away subsidies, take away all that, you're almost leaning on socialism. And hear me out why I say that. Okay. And at a certain level of it, okay? And this is why I say that, okay? I make so much a year. You make so much a year. Nobody's being taxed anymore.
Okay.
Right? Nobody's being taxed.
You're saying in a society with no government?
Society where there's, where we're doing this libertarian society where there's no, everything's privatized. Okay. I'm making X, Y, Z. You make A, B, C. Okay. It's significantly less than X, Y, Z. Okay. You and I are using the same park. You and I are using the same roads. You and I are using the same, all the same capabilities, all these same different things.
Yeah, but in this society, everybody's paying to use these things.
I understand that. Okay. I understand that.
Okay.
But the problem is if you have a set of society, a portion of society that can't afford to pay these things, and then you have another portion of society that can afford to pay these things. So are you denying that society the use of a park or that use of the road if they can't afford to pay it? You see what I'm saying? So I'm paying 80% of that park being upkept, and this person's only paying 10%.
So it's up to the people who own the park, right? If the person in the park's like, hey, I want to have, maybe the person in the park's like, I cater only to these people who have this much money, right? And there's a park over here that they charge less because they want more business from more people in general who can afford it. All right? So they lower the prices over here, even if the same company, even if this company's like, I'm going to reserve this park for the people who have money, like a lot of money, and there's going to be the XYZ luxuries or whatever, whatever they want. It's up to the...
So we're getting into some serious class warfare there in that situation, are we?
No, because class warfare is driven by the barrel of a gun and by the government itself. We're talking about voluntarism. We're talking about people choose to go here, go there, and to pay to get in here, get in there, to charge this much or charge it, and they let the market dictate it, not a human, like a sole human being. You know what I mean?
You hit the word. You hit the word I was looking for.
What's that?
The market.
Yeah.
The market dictates.
The market dictates.
And that's what I like to hear.
And to me, that's the opposite of socialism. Socialism, the government owns everything.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
This is where the market dictates. The market's like, hey, people are willing to pay. So in Austrian economics, it's the price-cost equilibrium, right? And the true Austrian economics, if I'm butchering it, my apologies, but because I'm not a super expert on Austrian economics, but the research I've done is there's a price equilibrium, right? Where as much as people are willing to pay and as much as someone's willing to charge, that there's an equilibrium there and it comes together, and that's like the perfect price for something. You know what I mean? So if people are willing to pay this and they're willing to charge that to go to that park or use whatever service, and that's what it is.
It kind of goes hand in hand with eliminating minimum wage, right?
Absolutely.
The market drives what people get paid.
Exactly. And that drives in more people, right? Because a minimum wage will lock people out. That's what they call a barrier to entry into the market. Because when we've discussed minimum wage before, if businesses now have to do certain things to be able to afford that minimum wage, it blocks other people, less skilled, poorer people from entering the market, for entering that business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. No, that's again very interesting discussion, and I really appreciate that topic because I think it's as you move towards a possibility and looking at, as you said at the beginning of the show here, is getting into the Mises caucus, and these guys, starting to take over by the states. And I tell you what, I've always felt and looked at myself as a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought process between being a conservative, Republican, or whatever the case may be, but a conservative. But then looking at the possibility of what is it that you really truly believe? What are your true morals? What are your true beliefs? And what drives you to your thoughts? And it's funny because you're right. It's like, oh, well, yeah, I believe that 100%. Leave me alone. I believe in freedom. I believe in doing what I want to do. But then somebody goes, oh, well, that person over there, they're burning a flag. How dare they? What's wrong with those people?
Exactly.
That's horrible. Because it's been indoctrinated into us. You're absolutely right. It's been indoctrinated into me. I respect the flag. I respect, but I can still respect the flag as a libertarian. If somebody else chooses to disrespect the flag, that's their decision.
Exactly. You see, it's a true. To me, that's why I call it the philosophy of peace. Right?
Makes sense.
I'm not gonna hold a gun to your head and be like, "Hey, you better not burn that flag." You know what I'm saying? Like, "Hey, people died for that." Blah blah blah. Like all the reasons they give, which may or may not be valid, but the point is, I'm not forcing you by the barrel of this gun pointing at your head, saying, "Hey, you're not gonna do that." Because at the end of the day, is he burning that flag? Is that hurting you? Like physically hurting you? And is he? If that's his own flag,
well, it's not my flag.
Yeah, as if it's his own flag, because it now be aggressing the non-aggression principle with your property.
Right.
But if that's his own flag and he's burning it, is he burning your property? Like you said, no. Is he hurting you? No. Whatever.
Well,
live and let live.
We are just scratching the surface of this libertarian discussion.
Oh, we are.
And I know there's a lot more that we can have.
Definitely.
But I want to take a break.
Okay.
I'm going to go use the restroom. So continuing our discussion with this, and one of the things that I'm a little confused about. And again, Aaron, I don't expect you to have all the answers, and I know that there's a lot of different things that are out there that that would have to be ironed out, so to speak.
Yeah.
But when we start talking about, let's talk about defense.
Okay.
Okay. One of the things that you had said is that the libertarianism, no taxes.
Yeah.
Taxation is theft.
Yep.
You've said that and you believe that. And I think a lot of us actually feel that way. But one of the things that we've been indoctrinated in our mind is that our taxes go to defense. And, I recall back into World War I, if you go back and you actually look at the propaganda for us getting into World War I, there's this huge guerrilla hovering over the United States with a German hat on, like, oh my gosh, we've got to get involved in this war or we're going to be speaking German.
Yes.
Things like that. But, and I don't believe that we need to be getting involved in any wars, okay? But I do personally have a belief that we do have to have a defense. And I'm not saying that we're going to get invaded. I don't believe that's the case. You and I were talking, and yes, we have a lot of guns here, but we also have a lot of other ways that we defend. The day and age, and full disclosure, the kind of realm that I dabble in my career deals a lot with the long range threat. The ability for a country to attack us without ever leaving their own country. And in order to create a defense capability, how does that work in a libertarian society? We talk a little bit about, you have if we're not taxing, when we talked about the ability to, well, hey, roads or parks or whatever, private securities or whatever the case may be, well, we pay it like we would pay a phone bill or our internet bill, whatever the case may be. That's how we fund these things. Mm-hmm. So how do we go about funding, if we do or if we don't, I don't know, a defense capability that protects the country as a whole?
Well, there's several different avenues there to approach that question, because libertarians in general wouldn't even agree on that, right? So I've talked about the factions. I've mentioned it before. If we want to break it more towards the more extreme, radical factions of how they view society. So if we're talking about minarchist and versus anarcho-capitalist, right? Because obviously the mainstream libertarians, they're not advocating for necessarily what I've been talking about when we talk about scaling back to the extent that I'm talking about, right? But if you had a minarchist society, the whole idea of minarchy is that the state only exists for security reasons, and therefore there would only be a military, police and courts. Like that, the government will only consist of that. It will be an extremely minimal government that would only function to provide a military, police, and courts. And so in that sense, you would still have a military defense apparatus defending the country, right? Or depending on how it broke down, depending whatever geographical territories that they're assigned to, just depending on how far that decentralization would scale back, like in whatever sense, right? If there are multiple states on this continent, if we scale back where there are multiple countries, in a sense, and there were a lot of minarchist states or whatever, then they could band together and create alliances and such, and you'd still maintain a military strictly for defense. When we talk more into the anarcho-capitalist version of society, which would scale back the government even more so, where now we're talking about polycentric law, which means multiple police entities, security entities, privatized. Same thing goes with courts, and then the military question is a little bit different. But one thing that ANCAPs would point out is the fact that in our society now, right, the cathedral, which I brought up before, they have indoctrinated, as you mentioned, indoctrinated us since we were very young, 5 years old, of the necessity of a huge, powerful military, right? So, they haven't, ever since World War II, right? There's always a Hitler. There's always a Hitler, all the time. China's a Hitler, Iran's a Hitler, Russia's a Hitler, always a Hitler. And we always have to have this big military to stop that Hitler, right? And so that's what justifies the state having this huge, powerful military, right? And, this is what we call the military-industrial complex, right? Like, we have to fund this huge military that funds all these jobs, and it goes back and forth, and it's one huge warfare state, right? So, when I talk about libertarianism and we start talking about minarchy and anarchist capitalists, especially when you're talking to someone who's been so indoctrinated or is a strict liberal conservative, especially conservative, it's a very hard pill to swallow that these threats, it's only the benefit of the cathedral and the state to exaggerate and over message, overblow these threats to the point that you're so scared that you need the peace of mind of this huge military to quote unquote keep us safe. But a lot of libertarians, a lot of ANCAPs, we're proposing the fact that, hey, these threats are so overblown that we personally don't believe. And again, a lot of people may call us fools for this. But we just do not believe the threats are as serious as people are trying to say, right? Like, America has 500 million guns, right, in the hands of civilians, and ANCAPs would still be, you'd revive the idea of militias and people being trained in arms, and everybody would still have guns. It's not like it will be a bunch of peaceniks here, right? And these weapons, these F-15s, there's memes going around about Biden and F-15s, F-15s, nukes even, and all these weapons, these tanks, they'd still be out there, right? They'd still be out there throughout the country, and there'd still be entities in charge of those, right? And I just don't think that, say there wasn't this huge military, that snap of a finger and suddenly we're being invaded. I just don't see it happening. And if it did happen, there's various examples from history, Vietnam, Afghanistan. It's not just because someone has a huge, powerful military, they don't take over so easily, so fast. You know what I mean? So, again, it's a very hard pill to swallow for some people to believe that, China and Russia, they're on the rise and this and that. I do not doubt that China wants control of Asia and that China wants control of portions of the world. But you also have to look at the facts and see that China's very divided, that they have a huge mass poverty issue, right? And the reality is, this American empire, this dominant empire, it's not feasible. It's just making the country go bankrupt, right? And it's to say that, okay, China wants to rule the world. Well, they probably do, but they also are probably looking back at us and going, wow, look at America over there. They're stretched very thinly, and they're literally on the path to national suicide, going to bankruptcy. Do we want that too, when they're already an extremely poor nation? Again, there might be some hardliners there that do believe that, but any rational person is going to be like, yeah, that is literally suicide, right? And so the official Mises Caucus libertarian position is anti-war and anti-military industrial complex and anti-Federal Reserve, which funds a lot of that, right? And that's why I talk about the non-aggression principle in the philosophy of peace, right? Because I'm sorry, but bombing poor brown kids on the other side of the world, I just don't see that as protecting our civil liberties here at home or protecting our freedoms. I don't see that equating to be the same thing.
And that makes sense. I want to kind of circle back though, and you made a comment, and again, I'm kind of playing but what is it? How would this work? Or so just bear with me.
Yeah.
And again, I know you don't have all the answers.
Yeah, I don't.
But I would. It's an interesting conversation in the sense that you said, well, we would still have the nukes, we would still have the tanks, we would still have the F-15s. They would be essentially privatized.
Yep.
And so let's go back to earlier in our conversation when we were talking about the parks, we were talking about the roads, we were talking about all these things that are privatized and we're paying them.
Yeah.
Well, if we have these defense capabilities, these tanks, these planes, these nukes, whatever the case may be, I don't know if you really call a nuke a defense capability, but it's a deterrent,
yeah.
A deterrent, so to speak. In order for that to be funded and utilized, wouldn't everybody in the country, wouldn't that be a bill that everybody in the country would pay? And wouldn't that be considered, if that is the case, isn't that kind of a tax?
So that goes along the argument that's usually they call it public goods, right? Public goods argument.
Okay.
All right, where there has to be, like, the government has to provide it and there has to be a tax, otherwise you'll have free riders, right? And I guess what I'm saying is that if we're talking about a true ANCAP society, a true anarchist capitalist society, then the only people that would fund that are the people that want to fund that. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not my concern, if I don't buy into the indoctrination and the propaganda that there's all these Hitlers out there trying to invade us, if I think that's all bullshit, which I do think, right? Then why should I be forced to pay for that? Now, if you are scared and you believe it and you truly believe, then you can pay for it. And then it's just, if you convince enough people to pay for these things and they believe that's what they need, then they'll pay for it. But if I believe that you've been just pumping me with so much indoctrination and propaganda, and to the point where, like, and I don't realize it, and I'm just scared, and I'm like, I need that peace of mind of a big, huge military, then I'm going to fork over the money anyways. You know what I mean? Like, and again, we go back to that kind of like the flag burning thing, right? Where it's like, hey, look, if you want to go ahead and burn the flag, I could care less. But I'm not going to point a gun at you and be like, hey, don't do that, right? It's the same thing with this. If that guy over there doesn't believe that China's trying to invade, I'm not going to point a gun at him and be like, hey, give me the money so I could fund this military to protect us. And you're stupid if you don't think so. I'm not going to do that. Because I believe, like we said, leave me alone. I'll leave you alone. I'm not going to go over there because even if I'm convinced that China's going to invade, I'm not going to go over there and point a gun at a bunch of people like, hey, hand over your money because we need to be protected. I either have to persuade them to do that peacefully, and I could bear all the facts wherever I need to do, and maybe they say, sure, here's X amount of money to fund this, or no, I don't want to fund that. So be it.
No, and that makes sense. I guess one of the challenges that somebody's going to have with that kind of philosophy or that thought process is, and again, this is a selfish thought, but I mean,
yeah.
while we talked earlier that in general people are good, and the principle is that people want to help and people want to do what's right.
Exactly.
There's also a level of selfishness in everybody. Let's be honest.
Yeah, but I think that's the selfish that helps society, though. Because because if you're saying people are selfish, then if I truly was selfish, it would be my self-interest to pay to fund whatever to protect whatever, right?
Right, but my point is why, and I kind of go back to, and again, I understand what socialism is, and I'm not saying that this is a socialist ideal, But what is a thought of socialism? Very broad range. But a thought of socialism is I'm paying something that somebody else isn't paying, but they're still getting to use it.
So you're just indoctrinated to think that socialism is, here's a gun, and now you either pay so that person will benefit, or I'm going to kill you or put you in a cage, right? But if you're just voluntarily saying, I'm willing to put this money out to protect myself, and if it protects them, then so be it, because I want to stay alive, that's different.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
And it makes sense.
Yeah.
And again,
that's not socialism. Socialism would be, here's a gun, and you either do what I do or I'm going to shoot.
And I get that. I get that. I guess what I'm trying to say is it goes back to my original statement of selfishness. Is why am I paying for something to protect my neighbor when my neighbor should be also paying to protect their neighbor? And I'm not saying that that's the right thing to do. I'm not saying that that's the right philosophy or the right thought process to have. I'm just saying that is going to be a thought process.
Sure, if those people believe that it's so important that that person needs to pay to, then they could persuade them. But what I'm saying is, no matter what, I'm against that person saying, hey, if you don't pay to support this, you're going to be thrown and locked in a cage, or I'm going to shoot you and kill you.
And there's your difference between taxation and what you said, call it voluntary.
Yeah,
right?
Voluntarism. Yeah.
Right. All right, and that makes sense. I think that's, again, as we start looking at the overall, I mean, if you look at what was the last proposed budget by Biden of however many $1 trillion it was.
Exactly.
We do know that a lot of that money does go to the military, or like you like to call it, the military-industrial complex,
yes.
so to speak.
Yep, it does.
And so the thought process behind that is, where are we at with how much money, what is the percentage of money that we're putting into a defense right now? And so just to kind of recap what you said, though, is now you mentioned ANCAP and you mentioned minarchist.
Yeah.
So ANCAP is all voluntary.
Yes.
Where from my understanding, minarchist, there's still going to have to be some level of tax at a certain point, or is that still all voluntary as well?
There's going to have to be some level of tax before those. There might be people with proposals where it's not the case, but just, you're going to have funding to have a military, and because there's still the monopolies. Like in ANCAP, there's no monopolies. At least if they're monopolies, they're market-provided monopolies, because that company or entity figured out how to provide a service at the lowest price. But the moment they raise their prices, someone else can step in. You know what I mean? Like, because you open the door for competition, which is fine, which is good. But in security, you don't really have that, especially, or at least you don't have that in a minarchist society, because there's still only a monopoly there. So that's why, you'd have to have a tax to fund that. And that's why, and I've mentioned this before, a lot of people, when they call it red pill, right? When you become red pilled, that's when you first become red pilled, that's when you see the media's lying to you, like, right? The cathedral exists and they're lying to you and they're driving the narrative. And a lot of ANCAPs will be more conservative, or not, my bad. Like, a lot of red pilled people will become more conservative, and they'll go towards constitutionalism and limited government. And then a lot of people, not a lot, but a good portion of them will kind of slide into minarchism, and they'll kind of stay there for a while, because they're like, of course, we need this military, we need this police or whatever. And even mainly military, right? And they'll I support a tax to fund this defense apparatus. But the problem is, for a lot of people, is when they really dig into it, and if you truly say what you mean, if you say taxation is theft, but I also believe a minarchist society where we have a military, and to fund that military, we have to tax. And see, some people will kind of become conflicted there, and that's how a lot of people will, they'll wake up again and be like, you know what, I'm ANCAP, because at the end of the day, that's taxation, that's theft, And I don't believe that. I believe in a voluntary society.
Okay. No, that's good. That's a good thought, and that's a good way to put it. So when we were talking about, just to dig down a little deeper into the difference between ANCAP and a minarchist.
Yeah.
One of the things you had mentioned, you talked about military, police, and the other word I want to hit on that you mentioned on the minarchist side was courts.
Yeah.
How does that look in an ANCAP society?
So in ANCAP society, you have what's called polycentric law.
Okay.
Right? Because right now we have a monopoly, right, on law. You have monopoly court system, monopoly police, etc. Right? So in a polycentric, you'd have competing entities to provide police and courts. Right? It would be based off arbitration. All right. So rather than having only one single court system with one judge who's accountable to nobody at the end of the day, right? Oh yeah, you could vote them this and that, and never happens, right? Same thing, just like anything else. If you go to a court and they're continually making rulings against the NAP, or being favored one way or another, a community, it could come down a community or individual. They could be like, yeah, you're fired. We're going to go hire this other arbitration company to run our courts. Or we could have competing courts. And it gets super, I don't want to say complicated, but it gets super, there's a lot of intricacies? A lot of intricacies involved where, you could have, like some people describe it like insurance. Right? You could have an insurance company, and that insurance company could provide you police and courts, right? And just like with insurance of your house or your car, you could have two different insurance companies, right? I have Geico for my car, and I have USAA for my house, or whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, the same kind of thing. Like for police, I rely on Geico, but for the courts, I'm using USAA, or use both, USAA for both. Mm-hmm. And then if you guys have an issue, then you take it to whatever company, USAA, just throwing some random name out there, and they would run the court system. But if you had two different court systems, right? If two different people were under two different court systems, then you'd have a third party involved, and they would arbitrate between the two or whatever. The point is, you can move around and use different court systems based on, just like anything else, how they run their business, right? Are they down the line following the NAP, following your basic laws and everything, or are they not, right? And you just kind of go back and forth. I mean, they use arbitration already in society, right? So it's basically an extension of that, but you would cover all areas of life in terms of courts and shit like that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting.
Again, I don't have all the details down because, like I say, it gets a little intricate, but it's essentially that's what polycentric law is.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, and that's good information to have.
Mm-hmm.
And again, just the overall philosophy of libertarianism is very intriguing. You and I were talking here. When we kind of took a break and we were just kind of having a conversation. I said, it's funny, you think, wow, this is me. I'm a hardline conservative. I'm all about my conservative values, my
Absolutely.
conservative thoughts, and this is what I want to be. And this, I believe in limited government. Okay, good. I believe in the fact that we need to be left alone. Okay, good. But at the same point, I also believe that we do need to have a defense capability. And it's interesting because at first glance, when you first start talking about, libertarianism and ANCAP or even minarchist or whatever the case may be, you start thinking along the lines of, well, they don't want any of that. They don't want a defense. They don't want this capability to make sure that we're protected. And then that worries people. They're like, oh, wait a minute here. Is that really what we want to do? Is that really how we want to live? But the way you present it, you're like, oh, okay. Well, that makes sense then. I can kind of see, because if you really think about it and you really start digging into how this works, it just makes sense. You're truly giving the power of your life or of the country back to the people.
Exactly.
Which when we escaped the quote unquote tyranny from Great Britain and all that, we formed America, and this, the wars and everything like that. And I apologize for the background. I'm sitting in my living room and my dog.
It's okay.
But when we talk about the escaping that tyranny, that tyrannical watch of the English, we formed the United States to get away from that. And yet here we have come in full circle, and I think we're kind of back into that tyrannical dictatorship to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Are we still a free country? Absolutely. But again, to a certain extent, like you said, yes, we're a free country, but if you choose to not pay your taxes, you're not going to be free. If you choose to not live your life a certain way, the way the government has dictated you to live it, then that freedom goes away. And so,
well, but John, this is why I'll push back on saying free country, is how can you have a free country, or at least a free society, if what you just said is true, right? I'll say we have a freer country than some other countries for sure, and I've been around the world a few times.
Me too.
For sure, we have a freer country, but do we have a free country? Or at least, I think the more appropriate term is, do we have a free society? In a free society, if you are a peaceful, nonviolent person, is it okay for someone to put their hands on you and lock you in a cage? And I would say no. And that it's not a free society if you have those things. Like you're talking about taxation or whatever, or live your life a certain way. The only time I'll say that a quote-unquote peaceful person who's not committing violence could be put in a cage, I guess, or be arrested, would be trespassing, right? But in my opinion, you've already aggressed onto someone's property. Right, but that's the only time, because a question that's usually asked is there any time in the rules of the NAP, is there any time a peaceful, nonviolent person could be arrested and thrown in jail or whatever? And I said there's only one exception, which really isn't really an exception, but that's if you're trespassing.
Yeah, and during the last NAP conversation we had there, when we talked about that was part of the discussion I recall us having is, well, what if I steal somebody's car? I'm not aggressing against that. I'm not hurting that person.
Yeah.
But I'm aggressing against their property.
Exactly.
Or trespassing, yeah. I mean, I think it could be a little misconstrued if somebody hops my fence and to go hop into their backyard or their fence.
Yeah, I mean, reasonableness,
reasonable.
Right?
That's the key.
Reasonableness,
right?
Key,
reasonableness, and that's what makes me laugh is
because there's one thing if someone's on your property and you said, "Hey, can you please step off my property?" and then they step off and like, okay, whatever. But if they're like, "No, screw you, I'm gonna stay here," and then that's when they do a sit-in, but they're on your property. Hey, I want this person off our property. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
right. Yeah, and that is I would consider that an aggressive act.
Absolutely.
Towards a person, but yeah. Well, I mean, you make valid points, Aaron, and like I said earlier, I mean, we are. There's so much you can discuss with this, and it's funny because I think probably a year ago today, you and I would probably be sitting here having a complete and different conversation.
I totally agree with you.
I mean, we'd be talking about how the election was stolen. We'd be talking about how horrible Biden is and how pathetic of a leadership is of this country. And I'm not saying that it is or isn't. I think that we are going down the wrong path in this country. I think that the cancel culture is ridiculous. I think the world of hurt feelings is hilarious. I think it's funny. And it's funny because when I say that, I can't help but think that a move towards a libertarianism society would actually eliminate a lot of that. It wouldn't fully.
It would eliminate a lot of it, because here's the thing. Is the cathedral, the state, they use divide and conquer tactics to turn us against each other rather than turning against them, right? They drive the narrative. So they want neighbor to turn on neighbor. They want white to turn on black. They want gender, this and that. You know, it's a cult. They want the culture war because they want us to hate each other, to despise each other. They want a distraction. So we're talking about these we're talking about these trivial issues, right? And arguing back and forth over trivial things rather than looking at them and being like, hey, you're the guys causing this because they need divide and conquer to rule over us, because that's the only way. On one hand, their rule over us is a complete illusion because we allow it to happen, right? And the reason we allow it to happen is because they are manipulating both sides to turn and hate on each other and to poke and fun and want to kill each other, right? There's plenty of people out there like, yeah, I want a civil war, this and that, right? If you are someone saying you want a civil war, you have been manipulated, you have been indoctrinated. Because what I'm saying is I don't want a civil war. That's the last thing I want. I don't want violence at all. And just because I say I want violence at all doesn't mean that I don't believe in self-defense, right? It just means that I don't want to continue driving this narrative of hate, right? It's this narrative of hate that the cathedral pulls, and people buy into it, and they start having these ridiculous arguments and discussions and going back and forth, hating on each other because of how people look and what they say, and it goes both ways, right? And it's a complete distraction. You are literally being manipulated by the cathedral. It's what Lenin used to say, the useful idiots. Like, you guys are being the useful idiots, right? By arguing this and that and all this trivial nonsense bullshit, right? When really we should be focusing on the state and the cathedral and how to return power to the people truly, right? In a peaceful manner, which is possible. And it's only impossible if we continue to hate on each other, right? Because at the end of the day, when it comes to libertarians, it really doesn't matter if you are a conservative person and have conservative views, or you're a liberal person and you have liberal views. Because at the end of the day, it's about abiding by the non-aggression principle, right? And just leaving people alone. It's about a good idea doesn't require force. A good idea doesn't require the barrel of a gun to live out, right? Like, it doesn't matter if you're more liberal or you're more conservative. And in the reason there's so many libertarian factions is because you have libertarian right and libertarian left. Right? You have libertarian center left and libertarian center right. Because it's okay to have these different viewpoints and how you think things should be done, and having all these different opinions. It really is a movement of tolerance. Now, not how the left says it, right? But how we say it, where we tolerate everybody, right? As long as you don't steal people's stuff and don't hurt people, you're welcome, right? Like, you don't require these, because the problem is you have like these two factions that are trying to take power in DC so they could rule over the other half, right? So this is the problem with centralization. This is the problem with having so much power in DC and so much power at the executive level, and so they have so much intrusion in our life already, so that no matter who's in that seat, it's just what side gets to dictate and rule over the other, right? And each side hates the other, right? Like, there's all this hatred towards, and so that's what I'm saying is decentralization and libertarianism. When you take power away from that centralized force, right? Then it doesn't matter who's in DC and who's, what I mean? Like, that's what I was talking about localism. You just worry about what's going on here at home.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
right. No, and I think that's important. And I think that's step one for anybody that's listening, is to start looking at it locally.
Absolutely.
Figuring out how you can make impacts locally. Well, Aaron, I want to thank you again for being here in person. It's great to see your passion in this. Like I said, it's funny how you can change your views and just you said it earlier, just an epiphany, it's like, wow, just woke up one day and like, this is what I really believe. This is my belief, and this is important. And well, I think because of the indoctrination that we've gone through in our lives, it is going to be a tough path for a lot of people to go down that viewpoint. But it does make sense. And again, I want to thank you for being here. And I really enjoy being a part of your show. I know that I'm not near as educated as you are with all this, but I tell you what, I do enjoy the conversation and the learning. And I think I'm going to have to look a little bit more into this libertarianism philosophy and see where I want to go. Me considering, I'm conservative. Maybe not as much as I thought I was. But thanks again, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Well, I have a couple things I want to say. I mean, number one, thank you for having me here and be able to do this on location, in person, at your place. So thank you very much for that. Number two, thank you for being part of my show. I love having you on and having these discussions. And number three, if to anybody listening, if you were to listen to the older shows that I had, older episodes, before I had my epiphanies, right? Like you'd see, if you were to watch all my or listen to all my episodes from the beginning to now, you could see a lot of the journey it took for me to get here. Because I was more hardline conservative. I mean, I always said I was right-centric, libertarian, but really it was conservative. And I kind of taken this path where I just had epiphany after epiphany, right? In the last year with all these lockdowns and riots and the elections, and I just kind of opened my eyes and I became more red-pilled and saw like the truth. And some of it was very, very hard pills to swallow. Because like you said, we're so indoctrinated, I was so stuck in my ways. And it was so hard to accept these realities. And a lot of people reject these realities that I'm saying, right? But then you see the truth. And it's like, like some biblical saying, like the truth will set you free or something like that, some shit like that. So that's kind of what happened to me, where I've been down this path and there's a journey I'm at. And I will say, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like I've kind of opened your eyes to some of these things, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And I really hope that I continue to evolve my way. You know what I mean? You're on your own person. Like I said, I'm a libertarian. You do to each his own. But I hope and I feel like I'm persuading you, I guess. At least slowly.
No, so. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And so again, thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. You've been listening to the Aaron Burr broadcast on the Free Thought Doctrine.